Willkommen beim Nerds of Law Podcast. Die Nerds of Law, das sind Katharina Bissett und Michael Lanzinger. Wir präsentieren euch Neuigkeiten zu Recht und Technik, spannende Interviews sowie Tipps und Tricks generell zur geekigen Seite des Rechts. Denn vergesst nie, Law is the ultimate science.
Nerds of Law, Episode 17, Legal Tech with Panache. Hello and welcome to the first English episode of the Nerds of Law podcast, and also the first one without Michael. He's off in prison as usual, and we have to do it without him. And the reason why I'm doing it in English is because I've got the guys from Panache Software, Neill Pemberton and Peter Davis, with me. I've met Neill and Peter at the Future Law Conference last November, and they said things like open source and new toys to me, so I was all ears. Yeah, so I thought we'll go even more international now and invite our English friends over. But what about you two? Tell us what you do, where you come from, and what is Panache Software?
Shall I go first then, Pete?
You can go first. Yeah, that's fine.
I'll do the intro. So Panache Software is a combination of mine and Pete's expertise. Really, I'm a lawyer and Pete's the technologist. So we think we form the perfect pair for legal tech.
Exactly.
We've got a good split.
Yes. It's in the job title. So we're based in England. Pete and I live in the southwest of England. I'm a lawyer, real estate lawyer by practice, and I'd been working for several years before it dawned on me that not everything I did was always the most efficient, and it could be done better. And in many ways, it could be done better using technology. So a number of years ago, I said to Pete, "Look, I'm doing some particular parts of my job. They're slightly repetitive, and would you, with your technological brain on, be able to help me do it better than I currently do it?" And over the years, we've started talking about legal tech on our own podcast, but also building a solution ourselves, which was originally geared around document automation, but is transformed into something much bigger than that. But it was all geared to helping me do my job in a more effective way. So that's how it got started.
Just all about making Neil's job easier. It's no matter the cost.
That's right. And that's what it's still about. Yeah.
And what's it about for you, Peter?
For me, it was probably just doing new tech. So my background is in software development, and I was primarily build sort of customization integration for a ERP package. Is kind of where my background is, what I've been doing for the past sort of 10 years or so. But of course, you're very restricted in doing something in that I'm always coding and building within the framework of that ERP package. So it's been nice to stretch my legs a little bit and use some technologies that I didn't have experience of, that I didn't have the opportunity to use previously, and to give that a go instead. That's where the interest on my part has been.
But now I have to ask for our listeners who don't know what ERP is.
Enterprise relationship software. So just doing accounting software, human resources, payroll,
all the fun
project
stuff.
Costing and billing, all of that really boring stuff that people have to do in your day-to-day lives, dealing with expenses and timesheets and things. So
not only though, it was your job to help me do my job better, but also you've experienced, like most of us, struggles and issues of working with lawyers, not of the same type that I do, but frustrations at how slow sometimes it can go when you're trying to buy a house. And when you're trying to buy a house in England, you're lucky if it's a 6-week process. Sometimes it's 12 weeks or longer, and that's partly down to the lawyers. It's partly down to the due diligence that's being done, the searches that are needed. There are a number of reasons for it, but overall the process is frustrating. So although it was for my benefit, it's also for everybody's benefit, really, for us to develop something which can improve the way that lawyers work.
So could you run us through that? Because obviously very few of our listeners will have the experience of buying properties in England and in the UK. So why did it take 6 weeks or 6 months, and what's different and what makes Panache Software so much easier?
Well, the process of buying a property in the UK is It's a painful one that's drawn out by commercial negotiation at the beginning, agreeing price, and we do that through agents, commercial agents, or residential property agents. Probably the same in that respect as to Europe. The legal bit of it can take time because the due diligence is divided into a number of different bits. Due diligence being the investigation into the property and the seller. And when we're looking at things over here, we're looking at the title, the deeds, which are all held by the English or UK Land Registry. So that's, or Land Register, I think in Scotland as it is. That bit of it is usually very quick because everything's online and is available straight away. So we're lucky to have a forward-thinking land registry that is quick, usually, to deliver information about properties. The slow part has traditionally been the gathering of other bits of information, searches from local authorities, and in our case, the Highways Authority. That's usually and virtually always the same as the local authority, which runs the planning rules and enforces local planning law and that sort of thing. So there are just some bits of the process that are still run by public sector bodies that just take a little bit of time. And then sometimes, my own suspicion is that at the end of the market where you're buying a residential property is filled with people who generally are priced quite low in terms of what they can charge their customers. So they have to do high volumes of what they're doing, and maybe they're not always necessarily on top of what they're doing, or they've just got so many things on their plate that they can't keep on top of everything. And that creates often a visibility issue for customers who, and Pete, you can jump in at this point, presumably, where you're talking about not knowing where things are up to. That's the hard part.
I mean, I think that's the key thing for me in this, and from almost an outsider to general practice and dealing with a solicitor and a lawyer, and whether this is the same everywhere, and I'm sure it's not the same even in England amongst different lawyers and organizations, but I would find that being involved in the house buying, the firm that we were using was probably about 5 minutes walk away from where I lived, so very close. But if they needed me to do something, if they needed to give me some extra bit of information or ask me a question, they would send me a letter through the post.
Wow.
So I would quite often ring up and they'd say, "Oh, there's a letter coming out to you," and it was the case. Why couldn't you email me or just phone me or anything like that? And this could be done now. And it's that kind of thing that if I wanted to know what was happening with the purchase, I'd have to ring up the lawyer. I normally couldn't get through to them, so I'd get the secretary who would ask them to ring me back. They wouldn't ring me back. They then send me a letter about how it's doing and things like that. And I thought this was crazy. Surely there's easier ways to do this nowadays. So that was the key thing for me, looking at and working with Neill on something to say, can we do something where a client can just have visibility on what's happening, so I don't have to ring up the lawyer to say what's happening, where are we with something, or if I do need to ring them, I've already got an idea of where we are.
You can target and make your inquiries focused.
And also the fact that from hearing Neill discuss things, he would be in this situation that all of his stuff internally was put on emails and things like that. So for me, asking him the question of where are we with this sale, he'd have to go back through all his emails, look at other documents to find this thing. There's no central repository for all this information. And that's kind of what drove us to look at doing something.
So what does Panache do? So is it basically the data room, central service hub for lawyers and their clients, or is it an internal software as well? Neill, how much of your life does it cover?
Well, the plan is obviously much bigger than it currently is. So we'll talk about what it does now and what we're doing immediately, and then what we hope it will do eventually. The first part of the job for me is making sure I've got happy clients, and they tend to be happy when they know where things are up to, and you can manage their expectation on timing. So that bit of the communication is not a difficult part of the job, but it's made much easier, as Pete was saying, when I have quick access to information. So part of the job that I do and my colleagues do is, particularly a financing of property, big properties with using bank financing, the bank will have a list of criteria that they want you to go through and certain conditions they want you to satisfy before they'll lend the money. So it's not about just me necessarily updating my client, which might be a borrower or it might be a lender. It depends which side I'm looking at. But I've got another set of lawyers acting for the other party as well. And then I've got a sale, potentially a buyer or a seller that I've got to engage. So there's 3 or 4 different parties and then 3 or 4 different sets of lawyers. So what we're starting with is essentially just a checklist, an online tool that allows people to see where they're up to at any moment in time, potentially upload documents into a message board, if you like, so that queries can be raised through the platform. And people can get a very quick snapshot of what they're doing now, or where they're up to, where the transaction is up to. So that's phase 1. And the plan is to build on that. You mentioned we talked about open source when we were at the conference in Vienna, and I'm delighted that you've mentioned that, because that's one of our key differentiators, is that we're not trying to hide our code, and we want people to use it, and we want as many people to use it as we can encourage to use it and to get involved. We really want to build a community around what we're doing and get other people's involvement in it.
Yeah, the community aspect is a big thing here, because we're talking about what can the platform do. The key thing for us was to begin to dataize everything. So rather than storing everything in emails, storing everything in Word documents, to store it as data in the system, because then it can be used for other things, and it allows us to then go on to different things. We might be starting with that sort of transaction process management at the core, but once we've got that there, it leads on to other things. I've got data in the system. That means that I can add document automation onto things now. I know what a user's doing, what they're working on, so I can actually start building in things like time recording capabilities and all that. So it's really looking at a task and then building on that. And although we're starting with the smaller aspect of let's just manage that process, allow someone to, design a process, the steps that are involved in, say, a house sale or something like that. Here's the tasks involved in that. We'll let them attach documents to it and things like that. But because we've got the data in there, now I can say, well, let's allow them to automate some of that documentation. Let's record their time against these things. Let's allow all these extra bits and pieces of functionality. And where the community comes in is by opening it up, we want people to, help us decide where we go next with things, what we focus on, how we make these changes and aspects like that.
I think it's a great point to start. And we've seen that visibility, like you said, Neill, is a very core demand for clients. But one thing that really triggered me is like, okay, open source for me is a big thing, because I use things like GIMP, etc., and I use a lot of open source tools, and the legal aspects around it is one of my core legal interests, I guess. But from a lawyer standpoint, from an IP holder, from an author perspective, I'd be awfully paranoid giving my IP out there and letting it run wild. Was it hard for you to get over this, to be really say, okay, I let people play with my software?
Yeah, I think for Neill it probably was more than me to say that we're going to do this kind of thing. For me as a software developer, to be honest, I don't think it's that big a deal. One of the key things that you have with closed source is I've got to protect my IP. That's why I'm employed. That's why how I'll get my money, is because I'm the only one who does this. Being in software development, you kind of think, well, actually, what we're doing, anyone else could probably do. The aspects we're looking at are not, so, we're not writing crazy algorithms and all that kind of stuff that needs to be protected, and codecs and things like that. We're just helping people manage process, and other people do that. And I'm sure that if someone the sale of Thomson Reuters or something like that would want to do what we do, they could do. They've got far more developers than me. So there wasn't a need to protect that IP because the benefits of opening it up were greater. The benefits of getting people involved, getting that visibility, allowing others to use the tool are far greater than keeping it closed. You know, I would like these things to, the way I look at it is, if there's another startup out there, say we create a time recording module for Panache Legal. If there's another startup who's doing another product that would potentially like to add some time recording functionality, I'd love them to be able to take what we've done and add it to their product and things, because it actually increases the adoption of Panache Legal then, and you know, it gets us more further users.
So what open source license is it offered up then?
So it's being offered up under I think it's the Aversion GPL license. So anyone can use aspects of it, assuming that they are also open sourcing that code. We did toy with the less restrictive ones in that anyone can use it for anything they want. But I quite like the prospect of building an open source product and growing that open source product, and that if other people want to use it, then they should adopt the same methodologies. They should be looking for that thing as well.
Yeah, you've seen. You're right, Pete. I was the one who was initially more skeptical about it. But a couple of things jump out. One is that if it's right for people like Microsoft to be doing what, open sourcing a lot of what they're doing now, then it's probably okay for us too to learn from the big guys, because there was nobody more protective about their software code than Microsoft. I
think for a long time they didn't even use open source components in their code.
Yeah, and there was a big report recently. One of the senior developers, they've come out and said now that they admit they were on the wrong side of history with their views to open source. And
the other thing, the initial hesitation, I guess, is that, okay, if we release our code, then we've let the cat out of the bag. We've allowed people to look at all the stuff that we've built and we've given it away for free. But to parallel that to being a lawyer, it would be like me having a folder with all of my precedent documents in there and then leaving them for someone else to discover. Unless you're the right type of lawyer that needs that specific set of documents, it's of no interest and no use to you. But if you happen to want to build a practice out of it, then you could look at those and go, this is really useful. It saves me an awful lot of work. There's no point reinventing the wheel each time. And provided I'm prepared to give you back what I get out of it myself, that reciprocity, which is what we're really looking for, and the community about it, it makes this, the two parts individually are greater than one. So, we hope that others can add to the project.
So if someone wants to use your software, parts of your software, they'll still have to credit you as an author. They'll still have to keep any further developments as an open source under the same license, I presume?
I believe, the Aversion GPL license requires that, if you're using a open source component, then the part that's being used in also has to be open source. So that does put a restriction on someone selling the code, but it doesn't put a restriction on if you're a law firm who wants to take Panache Legal in-house, develop your own, system with it that you use internally. You can do that without any involvement from us, and you don't have to distribute that code or anything like that. It only comes to the point of if you're then selling that as a product.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point in the GPL family, let's put it that way, is one of the licenses that does not lend itself very well to be used in commercial products because it goes viral quickly. The license spreads out quickly. So that's very interesting. And so the next thing, that question that raises itself, so it's open source, it's out there, so it doesn't just mean you can work with it, but you can download it for free. So once you've got over the whole, this is my precious, and put it out there, what's the business case then?
Yeah, this is the interesting thing, because the first question, I would say the first question that anyone asks when we say we're going to make it open source is, how are you going to make any money on that then?
I think my first version was, where can I download it? And then
Yeah, and I think
I'm
the key,
just greedier, I think.
I think the key aspect with open source is open source doesn't mean free. So you can charge for open source software, you can do what you want, but I think what it does is it means that where we were going to go before we decided to make Panache Software or Panache Legal open source, we were creating this as a subscription-based service that we would host, and people would buy a subscription, buy licenses for. That end goal hasn't changed at all, because that will still be there, because although the code is available to see and the code will be available to download and run, that isn't necessarily an option for everyone. Not everybody has the internal resources to run something like this. Not everyone has the skill set to be able to install and maintain something like this. So the business model moves from one of selling licenses to one of selling, firstly, support and services, but then also still providing that subscription-based service for those who want someone else to host it, who want someone to look after the system for you. So the only revenue stream that we've cut off really is licensing. But I think that in itself opens up further doors. Now, quite often there's a lot of issues with adoption of software packaging because of licensing. The license cost for an enterprise can be astronomical if you wanted all of your lawyers to use something, if you're in a large firm. Whereas with Panache Legal, they could potentially have everyone using the system for no cost. And in that case, we would recoup that kind of thing within services of support and aspects like that. So yeah, that's where it changes.
Because that was one of my initial issues, and we've talked about it in November. We've talked about it on your podcast, which our listeners also need to check out, obviously. That as attorneys, we're very limited on where we host our stuff, and not only are you abroad, you'll soon be even GDPR-wise quite wonky once Brexit hits. So having this in-house, or saying, okay, I give it to my ISP to run, is definitely an option. So that's where you could come in and say, yeah, we'll help you set it up here and help you run it.
Yeah. And I think for us, especially when we came over to the Future Law event, and that was something where we first encountered that issue with, certain jurisdictions won't let you run cloud-based solutions that are hosted elsewhere, and all that kind of stuff. And suddenly people who are just providing those solutions and maybe have a single instance running in a territory suddenly have no way of supplying you their software, whereas that's not the same with us.
And I think we would be delighted to come back over to Austria to help people with that, because Pete and I, after that, we had one of the best dinners I've ever had out in Austria, in Vienna. So we'd be very keen to come back for anybody who's interested in having us out there. So.
Yes.
Look, I've got a Raspberry Pi 4 brand new waiting for you. So
that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. We're keen to do that.
Yeah.
Pete's I think got one somewhere in his office as well, because that's the plan, is to make it simple enough and easy enough to use that it can be put on any device, really. So we'll hopefully be able to get that working.
Yeah, I'm at the moment. My office and what will be my law firm consists of an iMac, a Raspberry Pi, and a little Windows machine that I have to have because my law firm software only runs.
I think you're far
Windows.
too anti-Windows. I think you need to come back and embrace.
The There is no such thing as too far anti-Windows.
If it's any consolation, so I've got the Surface Book at home, which is my main computer, and then I was playing around with the platform earlier on my iPad. So it should be tech provider agnostic. I think it should work for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, so talking about the technologies involved, I am a C# .NET developer by trade. That's what I have coded in for years now. So that is within the Microsoft world. But actually, I think Microsoft themselves as a company are changing, and with a lot of their initiatives now, they are moving a lot of things to open source. The move of their Edge browser to use Chromium, creating things like Visual Studio Code, which is based on that, buying GitHub and using that when they already had their own systems is they're moving in that direction. And I've been very keen to build Panache Legal in using .NET Core so that it's not limited in where it runs. And in fact,
that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, so it will run anywhere. And at the moment, and I just actually was setting this up this morning for Neill, an online version of the software so that he can easily get in and test things out. And it's all running within Docker. And those Docker images are Linux Docker images. So the code is running in Linux, and those Linux containers are running on Microsoft Azure. So, it's entirely cross-platform all over the place. It doesn't matter. And that's been the key for it is, I want it to be able to run everywhere. And for a lot of people, that doesn't really matter. If we were just providing this as a subscription-based solution, it wouldn't matter if it was Windows only, if it was Mac only, because the users would never encounter any of that. But the fact that we're doing it open source, I want it to be able to run anywhere. So that's what we're aiming for.
But that's very, very open and modern. So what I'd be interested now is a bit more Neill's background, actually, because you work in a global, big law firm as an attorney, as a solicitor. So those are not always the most flexible kind of firms. What I'd be interested in, so what's the legal tech situation like in your firm at Dentons?
Yeah, I mean they're very progressive. They have lots of different tools on the go. They have had investment rounds before. They have two organizations, I think, called Next Law Labs and Next Law Ventures. So they're progressive. They're very much in favor of looking at it, and I think that's born out of efficiencies and also client demands and so on. So they look at things very, very heavily indeed. What we find here is that there are obviously inevitable differences between the different firms. There's the big firms, the small firms, and a lot of stuff in between. And a lot of the big firms have got funds available to invest into new technologies and things like that. So there are accelerators and incubation programs in the UK. I'm sure it's the same in the US, where they almost have a feel as though they are software houses themselves, in that they've got budgets and they've got money to spend to develop new ideas. What it seems to result in is 2 or 3 rounds of applications where companies, startups in particular, will pitch to them for either investment in terms of money or investment in terms of time to help people build their platforms. So there's a lot of that going on, particularly in the big firms right now. Then you've got a gap, really, where those firms that don't have the big funds are buying off the shelf products. They're buying what are probably limited to 4 or 5 main players, the solutions to 4 or 5 main players, the Thomson Reuters, Intap, iManage, and HiQ, until it was recently acquired by Reuters. There are lots of others. The big problem and the opportunity that we see is that those platforms or those companies don't necessarily offer solutions for everything, or sometimes they are a combination or an aggregation of different tools that have been bought up over the years. So Thomson Reuters, for instance, has got Contract Express, they've bought IQ, they've got various other things which they piece together, but none of it works particularly seamlessly. I think the same is true for Intel. So what Pete and I are trying to do with ours is we're building, and Pete can talk much more about the technology behind how the microservices work, but we're building a solution, a platform that allows us to add bits to it as we go along in terms of finding new needs, new requirements for clients, adding new solutions, but without necessarily throwing away what you've already done or paid for. So it's an interesting scene over here. Yes, you're right. There are big firms with lots of deep pockets and spending money on technology.
So then let's talk a bit more about the UK market, because, you've mentioned that you're much more open to cloud things and say where you're legally a bit less restrictive. And on the other hand, you've got those big firms compared to Austrian standards are huge, very big pockets. So I've got friends who've been to the Legal Geek conference in London, and if it happens, I've got tickets for October.
Great.
I'm not sure if it will this year or not. It's very difficult, isn't it? It's even in October. Yes. October seems quite close now. But yeah, we were there last year. We did a podcast there last year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We got to interview a few people and stuff there. So it's a great event to go to.
Obviously, we like to go out there and see what others are doing, not just other industries, but obviously in other countries. So could you tell us a bit what the UK market is like in legal tech terms? Is there everything and an abundance of everything, or are there some key players that you can't get past?
I think, you've raised a very good point, which is the Legal Geek conference. And that started 5 or 6 years ago in relatively small beginnings and has grown massively relatively recently.
It was tiny. I think we attended the first, we went to the first conference, and it was one room.
Yeah.
And it was pretty small, and it's a lot different now.
And I think he started it by having regular meetups and that sort of thing. So the legal tech space, although it's maturing, it's not new, it's still early. So it's growing very, very quickly still. And I don't know whether Legal Geek were the first, but I've seen others, at least I've noticed others that are also taking off now, like Net Law Media, Future Lawyer Week, British Legal Technology Forum. There are lots of different conferences popping up, and they're all very well attended by the top firms and the top technology companies. The one place which I would encourage people to look is the Legal Geek startup map, because that, luckily Pete and I are on there with Panache Software, but we're
harder to find on there now because there's a lot of people.
There's a lot of people on there. We were on version 1. It was much nicer because the crowd was smaller, but the new crowd on Legal Geek startup map version 2 is very big. And for anyone who's been on the London Underground, it looks a little bit like that. You've got coloured lines that intersect, and what it shows is all the different possibilities for legal tech in terms of what they provide. So whether it's data rooms or contract automation or whatever, time recording, all the different solutions. And then there's a degree of the sectors that they work in as well, whether it's law for good, access to justice, those kinds of things. And that's huge. So that it shows that there's a massive startup scene here. And that's true also of, as I mentioned earlier, the big firms, not just Dentons, but others as well, that are investing in incubation and accelerator programs. And of course, we have people like Seed Camp here who have invested in legal tech startups as well as a sort of, they're not the angel funds, but with seed funding, first round of investment or second round of investment. So it's big and it's growing, and that's at the early phase. And obviously, legal tech has been around a lot longer than that. To mention some of the bigger players, Thomson Reuters I would say are probably the biggest, and then Intab and iManage, but they're all doing very, very slightly different things. What I think you end up with is some overlap between them, and I think there's a lot of integration and a lot of streamlining to be done in those big services. And also, they think they've got to have to find a way of cutting some costs too, because although software development isn't cheap, unless I've got Pete with me, who I don't pay anything.
Yeah, I'm very cheap.
We all need those kind of geeks, don't we?
But I know software development isn't cheap and it takes a long time, but the cost of a lot of those bigger solutions is just astronomical, and it prices out a lot of firms, particularly the small firms. I guess, and in terms of what's hot, everything is about AI right now. It's been around for a while, but it's still a buzzword. Augmented reality is coming onto the scene a bit, and we're interested in that. And then we've yet to hear too much about blockchain, but that will come as well, won't it?
Yeah, but there is very much and I think it's becoming a well-known thing, that the legal tech startup scene, if you like, there's a huge amount of people doing it, but there's often the case that if you don't mention AI, you don't get funded. And that seems to be a big problem, I think, with the thing that people want that, even though they don't know what it means.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a bit of an issue like that with blockchain as well.
Yeah.
Been recently working on a project in the course of a hackathon, and then we've thought about, well, should we integrate blockchain? And we've got torn to shreds by one of the professors doing it, who's been on the show as well, and he said he can't hear the word blockchain anymore.
Yeah.
And actually what we're trying to do could be done with an electronic signature as well.
Yeah.
It's just not that sexy these days.
No, it doesn't have the buzzword. It's
Yes, but then again, sometimes legal tech is a buzzword, and I think some startups say, okay, I'm going to go into the legal area, where really they're missing out maybe on a bit of the market. So I sometimes feel in Austria there are a lot of legal tech startups who go in wanting to develop a tool for lawyers or for attorneys, for the legal industry, and not so much companies who say, I've got a software, let's adapt that, or let's make a lawyer-friendly version because of restrictions or confidentiality or God knows what. What do you think, which way round are the startups in the UK doing it?
So there's probably a mix. I think a lot of them are, and I think this does come from the startup process for a lot of people, seems to be, we have a good idea, we get on an incubator or an accelerator. So we work with a firm, we then get funding, we then go on another incubator accelerator. And all of those are geared towards working directly with lawyers and getting a legal tech solution. I think where we are doing something slightly different is that although, Neill will come to me with an issue that, we want to solve in what we're doing, but I've worked in all sorts of sectors with my previous experience with the product that I used to work with. That was used by charities, by local governments, by health sector, by professional services. So I've seen how everyone works, and Neill will often come to me with, we want to do something like a CP checklist, which is an aspect that we're looking at. Let's put that in there. And I think it's not my job, but the way I work is to look at that and say, okay, let's break that down. What actually is this, and how can I provide that functionality in a way that actually someone else could use for something else? Although we are building Panache Legal aimed at the legal tech industry, the underlying framework that we're building on is being built generic enough that it should be able to use with outside of the legal industry.
Well, it's got aspects of legal project management built in, hasn't it? In that what we're doing is creating a project line, various tasks within it, and how long those tasks will take. The date fields are incorporated into it, and then the date fields can populate something like a Gantt chart, which the project managers will be familiar with. And of course, the legal industry is looking outside of itself for expertise elsewhere. And we mentioned earlier on our podcast about process improvement and project management. Well, legal project management is just project management with the word legal written in the front of it. So there's no reason why the tools that we're supplying couldn't be used outside of law. But I mean, if you were Microsoft friendly enough, there's no reason why you couldn't use Microsoft Project too to do a lot of your project management if you were so inclined. There are tools out there. So I think a lot of people rush to looking at legal tech and thinking we'd have to get something so that we're on the bandwagon and it looks good in front of our clients. But actually, I mean, we have got one of my favorite episodes from our show was that Pete did a Q&A form which used the I can't remember what it was called.
It's the Microsoft Q&A maker, so their cognitive services and things.
Yeah, to change a frequently asked questions page on a website into a chatbot, effectively. Now, I see the exciting bit of that as, well, I don't have to spend any money on anything.
Okay, chatbot.
Yeah. There's one line of code to be used, which if you can zoom in on the screen enough, you could probably copy it if you had to. But there's a free tool, essentially, that can be used. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. But actually, if you think about the possibilities of that, any online inquiries about pricing, and the UK Solicitors Regulation Authority is very hot on pricing, and you have to be, if you're providing certain types of services, usually those that are to individuals, you have to be transparent about your pricing, and some firms still aren't. But if you could create an online chatbot that says, how much would it cost me to do X, that comes across as a progressive in that you're using a technology. It's not legal tech, but it's a technology. But also, it saves you an awful lot of time answering questions about quotes that you may or may not win, the work for. So,
I mean, I used to work in a law firm that did a lot of public procurement, and all those processes are extremely standardized with standardized deadlines, etc. So we were using Microsoft Project there and Kanban boards. So that was perfectly normal. And coming out of an IT company, I thought that was a thing. Then I'd had to explain again, moving on, what a Kanban board was to other attorneys. These are the things where I'm always a bit skeptical, where people come up with, I appreciate that a lot of lawyers, the non-techie ones, live within their framework of law firm softwares, research software, and the Office suite. We're like, oh yeah, there's a legal tech tool that lets you organize your data. That's not new.
No.
There's open source software for project management, for Gantt charts, etc. I'm always a bit skeptical why this. Yeah, okay, we have to put legal in front of it to sell it to them, but if that's what it takes, do it. So what I'm wondering, so if you're an Austrian legal tech company and you say you want to move in the UK, on your podcast, we've talked a lot about the restrictions that we have. What are the legal restrictions you have, or is it just Wild West, the way we think you're doing it?
I think your perception is probably pretty close to reality.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say things won't change. I don't think anybody knows truly what happens when we agree a trade deal with Europe, when the UK properly exits from Europe, EU. So I don't know the answer to that bit of the question. But in terms of openness and willingness to have external and foreign companies here, it is the Wild West. We have lots of people from, in fact, take the Legal Geek conference, for example. If you'd look down the list of attendees at that previous as well, you'll find people from Canada there, people from Sweden we've seen before, lots of German folk there. So yeah, we're pretty welcoming. Even though we voted to leave, we still love everyone from Europe.
Yeah, and I don't think the same restrictions apply. There are no restrictions on data having to be stored in the UK and things like that. I think individual companies and individual organizations sometimes have their own rules for that kind of thing, but there's nothing put down from a larger authority that says you must do things this way. So yeah, I don't think there would be any restrictions on a UK firm using an Austrian legal tech solution. I can't see that there'd be any issues with that. The biggest issue we're going to have now is that separation from the EU. That's going to be our biggest hurdle.
Yeah,
that we're going to have to overcome.
But it goes to show it's a very divisive issue for us, and a lot of people think it was a protest vote against other issues. So
that's always a good thing. It's like when you've got these clients who want to sue someone out of principle, and those are usually the most costly things.
Well, this will be costly for us, I'm sure.
But nevertheless, it's good to know that the legal tech industry is still open and still happy to work.
I mean, I think that one of the key things for us, when we met you at the Future Law event, that was because we were being hosted by the UK's Department for International Trade. So the embassy in Austria had got a room in the Future Law event, and had brought over some UK startups, and those, those links are hopefully going to be maintained there. And there's such a good, a huge amount of knowledge in there. The people that we spoke to at the Department for International Trade, there's such good connections that they had within Austria and within Switzerland and stuff, that I'm hoping that will help us negotiate some of these issues. But it was an interesting time to come over. I mean, I know that I think we were labelled as the Brexit room while we were at the conference, and they didn't know if we knew when we were going or not. It's so we're used to having them poke fun at us now. It's
I'm so glad it's not just me, and you're taking it. Taking it in stride.
Yeah, we understand.
we have no choice. What was lovely for us though was that most of the people we spoke to were saying, "Oh, please don't leave. We want you to stay." Well, we did too. So it can't be said that there wasn't a battle for people to overturn the original vote. Absolutely was, but
we
are where we are.
There was a moment where the pound plunged, and I went shopping a lot. But
take advantage while you can. Yes.
Yeah. So I think coming a bit full circle with the collaboration back to open source again. I mean, part of the thing you said now, you want to collaborate with people, you want to keep these international connections open as well, and open source is part of that, I guess. So you really want people to say they want to play around with your software, send their stuff in, send their changes in, send their ideas in. Does it just go for developers or everyone who's got an opinion?
No, so I mean we're hoping to actually set the repository on GitHub public, hopefully within the next few weeks potentially, and properly launch the software there. At that stage, there's still a long way to go with the development, but it's at the point where the basics are sort of in place. The actual, the core framework of how it all talks to each other, how it runs, is in place, and how we can push it out to Docker images and things like that. So I feel it's at a state where there's some functionality in there. It's ready for us to at least, to tell everyone we're here and this is what we're doing. At that stage, we're going to be looking for people to work with. So actually people who want to, come on, use the product and help us drive the development of it. So that will be either in
where can I sign up?
Yeah, this will either be in the form of developers who want to, take it, play around with it, maybe push contributions back in. We might be looking to let that happen.
I'm more the playing and breaking person.
Yeah, or just people who want to use it, think this is great, I'd love it to be able to do this kind of thing. Along with the code going live, there will also be the projects on GitHub of the sort of the future functionality and the things we're working on for it to do. So it will be contributing to that thing. As I say, we're building stuff to do things like CP checklists and that sort of process management. We know people do that in different ways. So if it doesn't quite work for you, we want to know that, and we want to know how it could be changed to work for you. So we want input from all.
I just want to say you might be opening a Pandora's box, because I've got a Kanban board with the developers from Urio, and I think you might start a self-help group.
We'll make sure we block your email address, but everyone else is welcome.
We've built what Pete's built, what he's built so far, based on how I've explained what I do to him, and how my interactions with other lawyers and feedback I've had from other lawyers, whether they're real estate people like me, or corporate, or banking, or whatever, litigation lawyers. But we don't pretend to have all the ideas. And if people have got ideas and think about how their job's going to be done in 5 and 10 years' time, and are happy to share that with us, then obviously we're happy to listen and take on as much as we can. And the whole point of the community really is to try and make sure we capture everything, and that everything that's good and that's useful gets done. So if I can give us a little plug on our Patreon account where people can go and have a look at our podcasts and things like that, then that would be great, because that's where people can, if they're interested in helping us, they can get in contact through that and sign up. So that's just patreon.com/Panache Software.
Over there, but yeah, we're looking for people to potentially help with sponsoring the project and things, because the only way it will survive is if we can continue building on it. If there's no interest in it, there's no interest in it, but we're hoping that we'll be able to get some people on board to sponsor the project, and then also push out versions that we can run and host for people.
Now, I would like to know, and I ask that a lot, and I'm especially curious with you. So what are your favorite tools, software or hardware to use? So what are the things you're like, oh yeah, I love this and it's great? Even if it's something common or if it's something special, what could you two recommend?
Well, I hardware size and stuff, I hate to say it on this podcast especially, but I am a PC person, and I enjoy building PCs and things like that. That's an interest. As I say, I've got a little Raspberry Pi, and I'm quite enjoying tinkering around with that. So
if you can get me Panache on my Pi, then I'll forgive you.
I'm working on it.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm working on the ARM release for it. But actual software wise, I like to use a variety of things.
Can be more than one.
I'm not someone who gets too hung up on one particular bit of software, and that's all I ever use. I must admit, as a developer, I'm heavily using Visual Studio and a little bit of Visual Studio Code and stuff. That's probably where I live mostly in software. But I'm beginning to enjoy doing some video editing as well, and using Premiere and Audition and things to do that kind of thing on. But yeah, PCs are my interest.
Neill, what about you?
Well, I have for computer, I definitely prefer PC. I have a Mac, but I just find it harder to use because I'm just so much more used to using the PC, because that's what I grew up with. So I'm stuck in my ways in that sense. Although my phone is an iPhone, and if you asked me to change from that, I wouldn't be able to. I'd have to stick with that. So that's it on the hardware. And for me on a project management thing, yeah, I actually use, outside of Panache, I use Trello. I quite like that. It's free, so that's always good.
What about as a lawyer, the things you use for work?
Well, we use probably what most use. So obviously the Microsoft suite, and then Teams is becoming a big thing now. We've yet to really fully explore the power of that, but I'm sure that will be really good. Most of what we use is time-based, because that's such a fundamental part of our day. It's how we prove value, is how we sort of track our progress. So, that's we use Intap for that, but I've heard of others that have worked well as well. So, but I like Intap. It's easy to use. It's fairly self-explanatory. And if you can't go too far wrong with it, then that's all the better.
Very cool. So before we sign off, and because Michael isn't there, I have to ask his final question that he always asks, which is basically more important than the Mac versus Windows question. At least for him it is. So, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Shall I go first this time?
You go first.
Star Wars. I could never admit to having seen an episode of Star Trek. So episode or film, I've never seen any of them. But I tell you, can I give you a slightly elongated answer, which is that I do like The Big Bang Theory, and given that Sheldon Cooper is so in love with the Star Trek characters, I probably ought to give that a go. But I've got quite a lot on my plate, so squeezing in learning about Star Trek is probably more than I can handle. So I say Star Wars, but the first set of Star Wars stuff, not so much the recent stuff.
Okay.
So the first three films.
Yeah, this is a very difficult question because I'm a big fan of both.
I've heard answers like Firefly or Doctor Who or Babylon 5 are acceptable.
Yes, I'm a big Firefly fan as well. If it is limited to Star Wars and Star Trek, I would have assumed previously I would have been a bigger Star Wars fan. But actually, there's a lot of stuff in the Star Trek universe that I enjoy. And actually, it may not make everyone happy, but the more recent Star Trek films in the Kelvin timeline and stuff, I very much enjoy. They are. I do like the recent movies and also the new series as well. So things like Discovery and stuff. My Star Trek began really at the Next Generation and beyond. I was a bit too young for the original series.
So it's basically more what you grew up with, I guess, then.
So the more modern, and of course there was so much more Star Trek than there is Star Wars. Although
good question, though. I like it.
It's difficult. It would be very difficult for me to choose. If I had to get rid of one of them, I don't know what I'd pick.
I don't want to send you to an existential crisis.
This is very troubling now. It's
That's why we ask it at the end. Well, to our listeners, I mean, obviously, they'll be able to find everything we talked about in our show notes. So, Peter and Neill, thank you so much for coming. It was a blast.
Yep, it's been great.
Pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
And, well, I do hope we'll see each other in October at the Legal Geek in London.
Yeah, well, we go as often as we can, so let's hope so. Fingers crossed that we'll be allowed out.
Yes.
And if not, then hopefully at some other point. I think.
Online when I sent my first, why is this not working? And I think I broke your code. At least it's that.
No, definitely.
Thank you again.
No, thank you so much. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Danke, dass ihr beim Nerds of Law Podcast zugehört habt. Auf unserer Webseite nerdsoflaw.com könnt ihr das Impressum, Datenschutzinformationen und viele spannendere Dinge finden. Dieser Podcast ist durch eine Creative Commons by Non-Commercial 4.0 International License geschützt. Das bedeutet, ihr dürft den Podcast kopieren, mit Freunden teilen, mit der Information, wo der Podcast herkommt und ihn nicht für kommerzielle Zwecke verwenden. Das Urheberrecht für die Musik liegt bei Mick Bourday. Ihr findet seine Webseite unter mickbourday.com. Live long and prosper. Eure Nerds of Law.